Hi, I'm Zach Buckle. Welcome back to the Farm Table West YouTube channel. If you're wondering why I'm wearing a Hawaiian shirt, it's because today is January 22nd and it is above freezing, which is the first time that's happened in the past 10 days. We got down to negative 32 Fahrenheit here, and basically it was about negative 20 every night for those 10 days, give or take. So I was freaking out about water pipes bursting and all sorts of stuff like that because we get negative 20 every winter, but negative 32 is a little bit new. We did get that last year as well, but it's been tough to keep things alive, and it's still a little bit of uncharted territory for me on the winter growing stuff because I prepared for negative 20, but negative 32 is a little bit new for me. But I'm also going to go over what plants survived that and what's coming up in the next couple weeks and why plants as ugly as this are actually really sexy because they're going to grow back and produce a ton of food for us really soon. Alright, so right in front of me is some Tokyobana that we've had here since November. All I did to protect it during our Arctic blast was cover it with 3 layers of row cover. Actually, this was 3 layers, and there's been no heat added to this greenhouse, so that's not very much protection. It kind of was a little bit of an experiment for me because I've never kept something alive through negative 32, but overall I'm actually really pleased with the results, and the reason is this stuff may look like hell right now, and it does, believe me. It's way worse than it was before, but there's actually still a harvest here, believe it or not. And if I spend the time, which I probably am going to do because it's January, we don't have a lot else going on the farm, I could probably still harvest 10-15 pounds of this for the market this Saturday throughout the week, and I'll just probably go through and pick the nice looking leaves, the ones that I could tell are not frost damaged. Like this guy, he's frost damaged, we don't want that bad, but this one's totally fine, and especially after we soak this in water for a little while, he's going to perk up and look almost like a totally normal salad green. So a lot of times when you see plants look like this, they're not as bad as they look, even through the kind of cold we've been getting. And the real exciting thing about this whole situation is I'm not even really interested, well, of course I'm interested, but I'm not really concerned too much about what we have left right now, because today is January 22nd. That means we are 2 weeks away from the beginning of the end of the Persephone period, which is the time from around November through February in our climate where the daylight is less than 10 hours. So we're at about 9.5 hours of real daylight here, and especially in this high tunnel because it gets full sun even at this time of year. So basically that means everything that I see that still has a growth tip that's alive, which basically you just look at the center of the plant like this, and you notice that the leaf is still alive and healthy, that's going to grow like crazy in a couple weeks. I'm actually irrigating these crops right now with our drip irrigation because I know they're going to need water, because I haven't watered since probably early December, and so the ground is very dry, but they're going to need water real soon to start really popping off. They're probably going to even start growing as we speak because we got a beautiful 10-day weather forecast. So January is usually the toughest time of year for all of the winter crops, for obvious reasons. It's the coldest time of year around here. Almost every year is when we'll get our negative 20 blast of some kind. But if you can navigate those cold blasts, which I've done a fairly decent job of it this year. I mean, if I had known the damage would have been this bad, I probably would have added a little propane heat. But I wanted to experiment because this knowledge is going to be helpful for any of you that want to grow these crops in the winter in an insanely cold climate like Wyoming. So what I'm trying to get across here is that even this terrible looking Tokyobana is actually still food. There's still quite a bit of food here, and we only have about 10 days left until these will regrow into a totally new crop, and you won't even be able to tell. So it's really exciting. My plan with this was to harvest about 90% of all the greens by right around now, which is pretty much what we've done, because we only have this little patch here that was fully grown, and then the plan was starting in February these will regrow into new crop, and I could tell the root system is pretty intact on almost everything here. You know, some of our worst damage is actually nothing to do with frost, it's rot. So all of this empty space here in the middle, that was rotting back in November because there was too much leaves and there was no evaporation, so the plants were rotting. And there's also been condensation coming down from the pipes I've got hanging on the top of our trusses here. And that's totally solvable problem when you start adding fans and stuff. It'll circulate the air and that won't even be a problem anymore. So a lot of this damage is actually not from our last cold blast. So it's really not that big of a deal, and it's exciting because even something as ugly as this is going to start to grow like crazy in a couple weeks. So as you can see, the spinach right in front of me has been harvested. We harvested every little bit of spinach in this caterpillar tunnel before the Arctic blast, because I know this structure is not going to be protected as well as a high tunnel or the other climate battery high tunnel we have. So I wanted to make sure we harvested before it gets crazy cold, but these are flawless. The actual crop is gone for the first cut, but the actual growth tip on all of these is perfectly fine. So in 10 days, these will start to grow again, and some of them actually are already starting to grow from our first cut, believe it or not. But the roots are perfect, the growth tip is perfect, and these are only covered with 2 layers of row cover. So if you keep the plant dormant but alive, there's still a lot of potential there, and you'll probably get a really nice harvest before it starts to bolt and go to seed. A lot of those crops that I mentioned will bolt and go to seed quickly, but you'll get a crop of salad before that usually. You know, sometimes you won't. Sometimes if it gets really hot in like March and you get some 70-degree days, they might go to seed, but even if they do, you could still pick the leaves around them, and it's perfectly good salad. It probably won't taste bitter yet. It doesn't taste bitter usually until the flowers really go crazy and the seeds start to form. And I should explain, when I say bolting, it's just the plant is trying to produce seed. So any plant that is genetically designed to go through winter will, actually not even really winter, but a lot of times winter is what causes this, will try and form seed the next year. Like carrots are a good example, or onions. When they start to form a flower head and try to produce seed to reproduce, that's what bolting means basically. And pretty much every crop that you grow does that, except for things like tomatoes, because you're growing tomatoes for the seeds anyway, or the fruit which produces a seed. But with greens and carrots and stuff like that, a lot of times they'll try and bolt in the early spring. But in most cases, you'll still get a harvest of some kind of greens before then, which is a ton of food if you're on top of it. And by the time they start bolting, you can start having a second succession of that same crop, which is what we're about to start doing here, and start planting for fresh in late spring. All right, so you see how ugly these carrot tops look? These are in the same caterpillar tunnel as that spinach we just talked about, and these things look terrible. But again, remember, we had temperatures down to -32 Fahrenheit, and all I did to protect these was 3 layers of row cover. So actually, all things considered, these greens are pretty phenomenal, because I've seen what it looks like when you don't protect them at all. They'll be black and slimy and disgusting. These are still actually green, which is kind of crazy. I'm even surprised by that. And the real pleasant surprise with this whole situation is this: carrots are still totally good. With that level of cold, we do have a tiny bit of damage towards the top, because the ground in here definitely froze solid. It's still kind of frozen, and we're 3 days past the Arctic blast, but I imagine today it'll thaw up really, really nicely because the sun is out and we're supposed to get up to 45 degrees. So it'll start to thaw, and these carrots are totally good. If you grew these for your family, these are going to be the sweetest carrots you've ever tasted. They're even sweeter than the last time I talked about them because the plants have been pumping in an incredible amount of the natural antifreeze, which is sugar, and keeping them alive. But as you can see, there is a little bit of cracks on some of them because they did freeze solid, but for the most part, they're totally fine. I wouldn't store these. I don't think they're going to store a whole long time, so I'm going to just leave them in the ground and harvest them as I need them, which is something you could do if you had a greenhouse like this. From experience, when there is a little bit of frost damage, they don't really store for, say, 6 months in your root cellar or whatever, but they're amazing fresh, and we're going to have carrots fresh for at least another couple months. And lastly, what we got here is Siberian kale that I grew in the summer, harvested most of it in November, and now you see how it looks here, all droopy like this, but I could tell this is better than any kale crop I've grown through the winter before because this stalk is still totally rigid. It's not even floppy at all. So it looks really droopy and ugly right now, but in 2 weeks, come back and see what it looks like then, because it's going to start growing. And this will probably go to seed too, just like all the other crops I mentioned. But again, I'm going to get another at least one more crop out of each plant, and maybe two, depending on how our spring goes. So that is a ton of amazing food that you can have in the late spring, which is probably the scarcest time for fresh veggies in the year. So the last thing I want to talk about is how ugly produce in the middle of winter is sexy produce. Look at this cabbage. This cabbage is from October. It's been in my root cellar since October, and it looks like this. Not very sexy. These carrots, you see there's mold growing on them and how dirty they are. These were harvested in November. And not all of them look like this. I picked the worst ones. But the bottom line is both of these can be washed up to look absolutely grocery store fresh and eaten in January. So if you think that produce like this is garbage, think again. You can make it into delicious food. I've made videos on stir fries that I had a week ago where I used this cabbage and you couldn't even tell. But all you got to do is wash this up and the rotten stuff will fall away. The inner leaves are going to be totally green and perfect. Same with these carrots, and they taste spectacular. You cannot buy food like this in the store. So let me show you what it looks like washed up. So the bottom line with everything I talked about today is a lot of what we consider to be garbage is food, especially in the middle of winter like right now. If it looks ugly, a lot of times you can make something out of it. And the bright side is if you plan your winter crops the right way and you harvest them the right way, plan on harvesting most of them before Christmas, you're going to be fine in the long run because you only have a period like this for this year probably only going to be about 2 weeks for us, and some years it might be a month where you have to kind of scrounge to make really ugly stuff look good, but it's not going to be ugly for much longer. Once we start hitting that 10-hour day, things are going to start growing again, and it'll be as fresh as it would be in the spring outside. So we're conditioned to look at grocery store produce and just assume that that's the gold standard of what everything needs to look like for us to eat it. But you know, back in the pioneer days, people ate sprouted potatoes and soft onions all the time because they know there's still a lot of food in the center of those crops, if you just pick away the bad stuff. This is how people survived in places like Wyoming for sure, you know, before we had grocery stores. So, you know, if you're really passionate about eating the best quality food that you could possibly buy, this is a good trick to learn and concept to kind of digest. And believe me, I know ugly food doesn't sell well. I sell only pretty food at the farmer's market. I can't sell the ugly stuff because I know people just won't buy it. And I don't really blame them. You know, I wouldn't really pay for something that I have to work that hard to make look good. But the bottom line is, if you are growing your own food and your food looks like that, it's still edible, it's still food. And if you live in a cold climate like us, where freshness is really hard to come by, but it's getting better all the time, you might as well still try and eat that. It's just, it still tastes phenomenal if you know what you're doing. So I think it's a pretty small sacrifice or obstacle to go through to eat as well as I like to eat. And it's worth eating. So just remember, if you plan it all right, you only have to deal with food like this for a couple weeks, and it still tastes really good. So hope you enjoyed that one, and we'll see you in the next one.